Hi, everyone. If you could just hang out a few more seconds, we're just going to wait for some more registrations to roll in, get our attendance up there so we don't miss anybody. So a couple more seconds and we'll get kicked off on this webinar. Thanks. Okay, that was good. I can't wait any longer. I'm very excited. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon to talk about 6 steps to building a bulletproof recruitment strategy. We've got some awesome experts on hand. Before I get to them, I want to remind everybody about a few things that we do on our webinars. You are in listen-only mode. You can hear us. We can't hear you, but don't worry. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to cover today, so lots to pay attention to. However, if you can't make it for the full hour, we are going to send out the recording and a copy of the presentation within 24 hours to everyone that registered. So please don't worry. I'll make sure that everyone gets this. And as always, please follow along online. We use #RDaily, and you will see that we'll be live tweeting during the webinar. So follow us along on Twitter. And I'm actually going to throw it over to 2 gentlemen that are going to be talking about some awesome strategies today. And that would be Erin Wilson and William Tincup. And I think Erin's got a pretty nice little slide he can show everybody with their handsome faces on it that I'll bring up in just a second. And while he gets to that, a quick shout out to our sponsor today, which is Glassdoor. Thanks for making this all possible. Erin and William, I'm throwing it over to you. We want to hear the expertise. Let's go.
Thanks, Lexi. Tincup, I just want to show you one more time. How we doing today, everybody?
So that's a real bow tie. Just before we get started, that's not a clip-on. That you actually really tied that bow tie.
That is a true story. Don't ask me how long it took me to tie my first bow tie.
Now, do you, with all your bow ties, because I've seen you a million times, with all your bow ties, do you have any clip-ons, or are they all
That's
the
a
real
negative
thing?
Ghostwriter. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So,
at some point in a bow tie life, you graduate and you can never go back. It's true.
you can that's it. If you've made it, you've done the bit, and you just can't go back. I get that. I have only worn clip-on, so I'm just going to admit failure. Just as we start the webinar, William's failure moment. I have never worn a real bow tie. So
we can't be experts in everything, Tincup. It's all right.
I'm trying to be an expert in one thing. So,
yeah.
All righty. So first of all, I would like to introduce Erin and how I got to know Erin, and then I'd like for him to take us into this bit. Erin's one of the smartest guys that I know, not just in the Valley, which collects smart people, seemingly enough. But he's just a very thoughtful, smart, intelligent family man. And outside the part where he doesn't drink, which, I don't understand that, but that's okay. You thought we wouldn't talk about personal stuff. Sorry, my bad. I should have told you that. But seriously, I'm an advisor to, it's funny the circles that we run in. He's an advisor to a company that I love, Teamable, and a CEO that I love, Laura. And I'm an advisor to his startup, HirePool, which is changing the game with candidates. He'll talk to you about that at one point. But absolutely love Erin. Can't imagine a better person to talk to about this topic. And Erin, I'm gonna pepper you with questions and make it really inappropriate at different points, but take us away.
Wouldn't expect anything less. And thanks so much for having me, Tincup. I continue to appreciate the platform you've built for talent leaders like myself out there to get out and do good work. I'll include HR as well, if you make me.
Nice.
Yeah, I think, just to dive in, we're going to get into 6 steps here. Hopefully you can take a nugget away from one or several steps throughout the webinar. That's always our hope, that you could hear one of them and say, raise your hand. That relates to me. And then go back to the office today and do something. So hope we can get there across 6 different steps of implementing a bulletproof recruiting strategy. To start the discussion, though, I'm going to change the title of the webinar and say we're not building a recruiting strategy. So let's get provocative. Let's get weird. If you've never met me, or if we talk in the future, instead of hearing the words recruiting strategy, you might hear the phrase talent engineering. So a fair amount of what you hear over the next 45 minutes or so came from that concept and talent engineering. And a quick breakdown of the difference. It's a little bit less about comparing one or the other to me. There's a simple idea that recruiting as a whole has come from the depths of hell and is working its way to a place where the companies value it. But in general, there's a new approach to talent, and it's a rigorous approach, and it's collaborative, and it's data driven. And so, and we like to call it talent engineering. And to be fair, we totally stole that name. We stole that name from engineers of many kinds, just like software engineers stole it from mechanical engineers and civil engineers. And so I would make the argument that it's both a true statement, but a new statement, something we can build together. So I'll dive into that a bit more, but the upshot is a lot of what I talk about may sound like building products or features or shipping those things, because I think whether it's hiring a person or promoting a person or shipping a product, technology has influenced all of us in a way to be more rapid, to be more iterative. And your recruiting strategy or your talent engineering strategy is no different. All right, let's dive right in. Of course, one last, yet again, thanks to Glassdoor for hosting the event. And let's jump right into step number 1. So I'm a big image fan, not a lot of words. I'm sure in the webinar coming out, there'll be some notes. They're raw, you can have them. Assuming Tincup lets you have them. But you know, the first step we always talk about is getting your house in order. And I love Top Chef. I don't know about you guys, but I love Top Chef. And particularly there's this week in Top Chef that kills everybody called Restaurant Wars. And it's this idea that you can assemble a small team ad hoc and then stand up an entire restaurant in a day and start serving people. It's not unlike recruiting, right? And typically you walk into a company, there's some fire alarm that's gone off, and so we need to hire 400 people, or we need to hire 40 people, or we need to hire 4 people, and it's always in a short period of time, and they need to start yesterday, and very often, you know, the first question I have is, well, are we in shape to go do this? So I'm going to just call out step 1 here. When I say get your house in order, really means a couple basic things. So 1, it's 2 parts. There's a lot of conversation around, you know, talent and recruiting and their job, but a successful recruiting strategy, it always depends on at least 2 parties. And so the way I break it down is the front of the house and the back of the house. So when you think about your last restaurant experience, you went into the restaurant. For you, you went in, you sat down, you had a bite to eat, you left. But if there were only the front of the house, you wouldn't have gotten your meal. And if there were only the back of the house, you would have never got sat. So it actually takes both for you to sit down, enjoy your meal, and walk out a happy customer. Recruiting's no different. So in this case, when I think about the front of the house, I'm talking about talent. So you're going to have a talent person on the ground. You know, seniority and experience may depend on your situation, but having an individual there who's thinking about this problem 24/7, interacting with the market and representing talent as a requirement. The back of the house, this is our business side. You're also going to need a champion on the business side. So whether that's your CTO, chief product officer, typically the CEO sounds like a good idea, but isn't, because they're not functionally deep. So you want to look for that back of the office partner in your business, and together the 2 of you are going to drive this new strategy. It's really important to note, though, while you're getting your house in order, it's very clear who's in charge. There's always the general manager of the restaurant. And in this case, and I'm very bullish on this, Tincup, maybe this could be our first debate here, but you know, totally believe that talent has to have the governance. There's no way for this group, for you and your recruiting strategy, to go and do good work across the whole company unless they're empowered to drive that governance broadly.
Yeah, so I define governance for folks just a little bit further. Give them some examples of what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, steps 2 through 6 are going to include other requirements, rules, running rules, how we play nice together, how we communicate, what we can and can't do, things that help us work together well as a team. And somebody's got to be keeping an eye on all those rules, essentially, making sure that, hey, we all follow the plan.
And in your mind, that person is the VP of Talent Acquisition.
Absolutely. Again, got to be someone whose full-time job is talent. I mean, I've worked with some really impressive CTOs or VP of engineering, but they have another job, as we all know.
That's right. That's right. And a part of this is the house in order, just so I make sure I understand. Process, products, and people. It's a combination, a coalescing of all of those things and making sure they're in order.
The whole bit. You got it. The people, the process, and the systems or the technology, right, in most cases. Again, can't serve a simple meal without all the pieces. So I think, before we move on here from step 1, I want to talk about Tincup. Well, how do you actually change this? I don't expect, a recruiter who doesn't have a ton of experience to walk into an executive room and say, hey, we got to get our house in order. So I do believe, though, that executives, typically business people who are smart, respond to data. So we'll talk about data a lot throughout this webinar. And there's a couple metrics here around getting your house in order that are interesting to start with, and anyone can track. So let's go back to our restaurant example. Reservations. If you don't have reservations, you don't have patrons. If you don't have patrons, you don't generate revenue. If you don't generate revenue, your restaurant shuts down. You follow? On the flip side, if you don't have interviews, you don't have job seekers. If you don't have job seekers, you don't have hires. If you aren't hiring and growing your company shuts down. So what I like to do, and what anyone can do, is start tracking your reservations or your interviews, and more specifically, when they get rescheduled. When people are on time, not on time. Again, just stick in the analogy. You've opened your restaurant, you have a bunch of customers coming in to sit down, and every time a customer walks in to sit down for their 5 o'clock reservation, they don't get sat until 5:30, or no one greets them at the door, or when they get sat at the restaurant, no one brings them water. Not a great experience. They're going to Yelp. They're not coming back, and they're certainly telling all their friends, don't go to that restaurant. Your company and your hiring process are no different. So if, as a team, we're unable to execute scheduling an interview and executing said interview on time, then the rest of this conversation is a moot point.
Let me ask you a quick question. It's been my experience that people kind of come up through one of two worlds. Somewhere between the ages of 15 and 22, let's say. They either worked in the restaurant world and served people that way, or they worked in the retail world and they served customers that way. Just anecdotally, do you think that the better recruiters have had some of that life experience, some of that training of understanding customers?
I think it's a good point. I'd have to agree, and to the point where you learn, you appreciate the small things and the hard work in the service industry. And I think bringing that to the recruiting process, it seems like you're doing something small, but it really means a lot to the customer, in this case, the candidate. So I absolutely agree.
It's funny how candidates are nervous. I mean, everybody is. That's even if you're arrogant and overconfident or confident or, whatever, or you don't want the job, once you get there and you're in the bid, everyone is nervous on some level. So like, how do you as a recruiter and a hiring manager, how do you mitigate that? How do you actually make them less nervous so you can get to the real person behind the nervousness?
That's right. Yeah, one of the sad parts about our industry, though I'm excited as it develops, is there isn't as much data as we would like, broad stroke data. But, there's enough research out there that says more than 90% of people are anxious when going to interviews. So I think that's absolutely true. And part of that, Tincup, is because I believe they feel the need to make up for the shortcomings on the company side often. Right? Yeah. I have no clue what they're going to ask me. I have no clue how senior this role really is, or what I'll really be doing, or who I might report to. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but job seekers go to interviews without knowing that stuff all of the time.
Right.
So imagine, how much anxiety you have to take care of all of this, as opposed to just focus on something maybe more appropriate for the interview.
Right.
All right, so step 2, let's assume we've got our house in order. We've got a talent person in a seat. We have a business person that gets it. We can set interviews and show up. So we're off to a good start. The second step that I always spend time talking to teams about is really being rigorous around the requirements. And this image from a blog post that I wrote several years back is still one of my favorites, because every time you tell the story to a recruiter, they just roll their eyes and they acknowledge that it happens all the time. And I'd like to just take you through a really simple example of requirement gathering and what happens, and then draw it back to the organization here. So, when you sit down as a recruiter, you sit down with one hiring manager and you say, okay, you've got this position. What are the requirements? Well, what you typically see is that discussion starts with a pretty basic set of requirements. These are the things they need right now. And then that list, it quickly expands into the things that they would really like to see in a hire for the next, call it 6 to 18 months, maybe 2 years, more of a midterm. But before you know it, there's a third section in the job description of requirements, which include things that would be so awesome if I could have them on my team in case we want to build a rocket ship one day, like Elon Musk, or in case we want to start a new scooter company like Bird, so we can go raise a couple $100 million. And then this job description gets posted to the web. The same thing happens at a company level, right? Okay, we need 50 hires. Okay, I sat down, we need 100 hires. Okay, we need 150 hires. Great, who's the first one reporting to? I don't know, we'll figure it out. Right? So in this area, I think, again, takes a lot of rigor, but we really want to get back to the idea of gathering requirements even at a company level. So starting with questions like, hey, so excited, we want to build a recruiting strategy. Why? Let's start with why. Why? Did we raise new money? Did we promise the board we would hire a certain number of people? Are we launching a new product? Are we generating a new revenue stream? But let's really start that dialogue and start to centralize it amongst the leadership group so that we can actually create a productive conversation as part of step 3. So just really quick, step 2 is not that complicated, but it's the idea that when us as a talent community are asked to put forward a recruiting strategy, more often than not, instead of just putting forward that strategy and seeing it fail down the road for unforeseen circumstances, we can take a step back and really focus on the requirements of the overall ask.
Okay, I got several questions. So
yeah.
let me hit you with a couple of them. You see this as a collaborative process, obviously, between the recruiter and the hiring manager. How do you deal with hiring managers that can't eloquently tell you what they want, or somehow it's art? They won't know it until they see it, that type of stuff. So the first question is, how do you deal with hiring managers? They're either new, or they can't give you what you need. What do you do?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 approaches. One is pretty matter of fact, and I'll come back to the word data. So when you're talking to hiring managers, and this is bleeding a little in step 3, but as you're talking to a hiring manager about roles, being really pragmatic about that. So for example, Tincup, if you came to me, you were a tough hiring manager and said, hey, I'm looking for this position, and the position seems, unrealistic, let's say. One thing I would say is, hey, I hear you. Let's jump on LinkedIn together so we can do some paired sourcing. I'd love to look at the total addressable market for this role. And so I'm going to take you into LinkedIn, and I'm going to perform the search right in front of your eyes that includes requirements that you're asking. And in most cases, when you do that at a starting point, what you end with is some minuscule number of search results. Like
there are 2 people.
Correct. Or less than 30, right? Or less than 100. And so you can, appropriately turn to your hiring manager and say, hey, if this is the plan, I'm okay with that. However, this is 30 people out of 400 million who have what you're looking for. So understand that each time we talk to one, we lose X%, right? Again, we're not God in talent to investigate different data. So I think that's one approach I would take. The second is, and it comes with a little bit more trust and credibility, but again, just relying on agreements contingent on data. Hey, what you're looking for, I believe, is tough, but I'm not afraid of a challenge. So why don't I show you 2 or 3 people, and then after those 2 or 3 people, we'll calibrate.
Oh,
or
that's
after those
nice.
2 or 3 people, if I'm off, you let me know.
That's
And
nice.
we can talk about specific benchmarks.
You tack them up on the wall and you do an art critique. Okay, what do you like? What do you not like? Oh, I like that. That's nice. I hadn't heard that before. Do you think in the gathering of requirements that you have to have the discussion with the hiring manager about what's next? And the reason I'm asking this is because I'm thinking about candidates coming into the marketplace, different than previous years, and wanting to know more about internal mobility, wanting to know about what happens if I do a good job here, what happens after that. Is that a part of gathering requirements?
So it's not a part of this slide, the gathering requirements. It's a part of gathering requirements at a position level. I think we'll talk about in the candidate design process.
Okay.
So we'll get there. You're jumping ahead.
Yeah, as I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just to let's get into here really quickly. So that dialogue starts here, right? Tincup. So we talk about prioritization all the time. The image, it's kind of a joke, but it's really serious. As a recruiter, you're asked to go recruit for something, and then you ask the business who reports to, and the answer of "we'll figure it out later" is not uncommon. Again, shocking, but it happens. And I think this goes to what you're talking about, Tincup. So in this case, prioritization. Okay, if we were building a product, we'd have a bunch of features we want to build. We have to decide when to build those features, what order, how we do it. Same thing. We need to hire a bunch of people. Those people are going to go in a variety of groups throughout the company. However, we only have one team that sources those people. So we have to really think about how we use those resources. And in order to do that, we have to ruthlessly prioritize our business needs. So the way that I would step through this, and again, these are things you can start doing this week. You set up a Google Sheet. You create a tab for each executive or department or team, or however your org is structured, with obviously the buy-in from your internal champions. Go back to slide 1 for a second. Then you put that spreadsheet out and you ask every stakeholder to, by Friday, you have 5 days, tell me everybody you need to hire in the next quarter or 6 months. You can pick your time frame depending on your company's stage. And then they turn it in by Friday. The following Monday, you get in a room, all of the same stakeholders, the spreadsheet, all of the tabs, all the business needs. And in each in each tab, the business leader has gone in and said, here are the roles I have, here's the business need for that role, and here's the estimated budget that I think I need for that role. Very simple columns. And then talent's job in that room is to facilitate the conversation between business leaders. There are really common themes we see that end up blocking your recruiting strategy. So for example, when you look at those sheets, you might find that 3 different groups believe they need a data analyst because they need someone who can get into the database and translate what's happening to people who are non-technical. Well, instead of going and hiring three data analysts randomly for 3 different groups, what if we had a conversation around, should we centralize that function, or should we be talking about data science instead of data analyst? Or if someone said, I need a security engineer or a project manager for security, well, should we be starting a security charter or not? Or, hey, this position is our most important position in the company. Great, who's it report to? Oh, we'll figure it out. Well, let's not do it then. Let's talk about it now. So when you get into these discussions, I think it's the first place, really, Tincup, you're going to start having those deeper ones. And if they, and if your business leaders are having a hard time with those concepts, I would come back to, as you said, we need to be more thoughtful about this. It isn't as simple as you tell me what you want, I throw it on Monster, and people start applying. That's not the world we live in anymore. All right, so step 4. You've got your house in order. Yeah.
Hey, Erin, I was on mute. I was yelling at you. No, I'm just kidding. I did. This slide, before we move forward, two things have come up. One is your take on active versus passive candidates. And before you tell me what your take is, I also want you to tell the audience how you deal with, because you're an ethical guy, how do you deal with hiring managers that you can tell their bias? Either they've told you they're biased, which happens all the time, or you can just sniff it out. Like, we recruit from the University of Michigan for a reason, Oh, okay, all right. Like, there's nobody smart outside the University of Michigan. So biases. So on one level, what's your take of passive versus active candidates? Second, how do you interact with hiring managers around their biases?
Yeah, the first question is maybe a bit of a holy war here. I don't think there's a difference between active and passive. I think everybody is active. There's a very small percentage of people who are NA, right? Very small. Sub 5% of the world would not move for the right opportunity because they believe they're in the absolute right opportunity. I think the rest of the world is more open-minded than they've ever been. So it's a little bit less about identifying active or passive and more about identifying, the delivery mechanism that works best for your brand and your needs, and really thinking about the set of career trajectories you can provide to your next set of hires and marketing that towards that audience. So that would be my first response. The second piece is steps into step 4, Tincup, and really that candidate-centric interview process. So if I can, I would just jump here, and I think some of that bad behavior that you're mentioning, the biased behavior, doesn't have to be bad. Sometimes it's unconscious, but it happens if you let it happen. It also happens because we don't know better, and so it just has to start really early. So my first response to you is structured interviewing, because if I get the whole company to agree that us interviewing in a similar and structured way allows us to be better as an organization, then there's less room for rogue hiring managers, right? If I've got 10 directors standing up saying, this is how I do it, the 11th one saying I do it differently, now it stands out in a different light. So, I think first and foremost is, can you get the buy-in? Goes back to slide 1. But the second piece is truly designing a candidate experience. And the quote here is from a blog post written by a former CEO of mine, and was literally his response. And what he's talking about was in our early days, we put a huge emphasis on designing the experience of the rejected candidate. And so this is a simple idea. The candidate experience matters because candidates are the lifeblood. If we don't deliver a great candidate experience, they won't come work here. It's that simple. And we knew that of the applicants we got, that we were rejecting 98% of them. So here is 98% of the audience that's proactively coming to our brand to learn about our brand, to understand our business and potential opportunity to work here. We were saying no thank you to, and nothing else. And so, going as far as designing the way that you reject candidates is a good anecdote of how thoughtful you need to be, but I want to bring it back to candidate experience. So for example, when you talk to your hiring managers and they get into designing the process for themselves, we have to remind them it's not for you, it's for the candidate. Obviously we need to assess people, but I think that's a good reminder. To start this process though, it's not the process, it's the requirement, back to your point, Tincup. So whenever somebody has a position they want to hire for, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Hopefully in the company, you can get to a place where you have shared principles in your interview process. But let's say, Tincup, you're my hiring manager, and you say, you've come to me and you say, Erin, I got this role and I want to hire for it. Okay, great. It's approved. I know this. The first thing I'm going to send you, I'm not going to ask you for a job description. I'm not going to start sourcing. I'm going to send you a user story. The user story is written out, I like to call it 3-dimensional. So it makes you think about the hire in terms of the people they'll work with, the projects they'll work on, the tools they use. But it also makes you think about how they impact the company It also makes us think about how we impact their career trajectory. So as you go through the user story, we're always talking to the hiring manager about is, if I were a job seeker and I was thinking about my career trajectory and how the next job was going to give me options for the future, like internal mobility or career change or promotion, right? Is the opportunity here at your company going to give me those pathways?
Mm-hmm.
And so starting that dialogue with the user story, and then also making sure that we don't start the process until that user story is complete in a thoughtful manner. So that's really where we hone in there initially in this piece, in this bit, Tincup, and get people to think, be thoughtful, simple as it sounds.
So a couple questions come up here. How do you know, because everyone's got different perspectives on what, just the restaurant experience, right? Going back to that metaphor, which I think is a really good one for us to think about. Everyone's got, you and I could go to the same restaurant, order the same food, sit tables away from each other and have vastly different experiences. And that happens every day, right? So some of that's the expectations we go in with, the baggage, if you will, the baggage we have. And so I want to ask 3 questions. One is, how do you know that your candidate experience is working? Like, at what point do you know, okay, we've got this, or obviously we're going to continue to innovate, but it works, like we're doing the right thing. So let's tackle that question first.
Yeah. So the way I would think about this in layman's terms is, if we are able to say what we're going to do and then do what we say we're going to do, we'll deliver a great candidate experience. That's the first one. We have to be able to predict and deliver, right? That allows us to set expectations for the candidate. So right off the bat, I would say that being thoughtful enough about your process so that you can communicate it ahead to a job seeker is a great place to start, to give them the choice. Do you want to partake in this experience or not? So making an experience opt-in at some level is a good place to start. The second piece is documentation and measurement, which I'm sure we'll unpack throughout the webinar. But, again, actually writing this stuff down, sharing it with a group, and agreeing that it makes sense for the candidate, not the company. But there's some bullet points that I can give you as well, Tincup. For example, in the hire pool team, there's 3 of us. We have a combined 30 years of recruiting experience. I would say we've interviewed close to 50,000 people in our lives, mostly job seekers. There are some things that humans, we just appreciate, like responsiveness. So I can tell you how good your candidate experience is based on how responsive you are. How long does it take you to get back to people, right? Whether you do or don't have feedback. I can tell you how good the candidate experience is based on how long it takes you to get from the first interaction with the candidate to an offer. There's really no set time frame for a job search because, to my earlier point, everybody's active all the time. Could be a month, could be 6, could be 2 years, depends on what level and how serious, and et cetera. But when I engage with you and I'm focused and I want to go work at your company, if the process takes more than 22 business days, then you're taking longer than the average company in the world. And I know that. Set data. Right. So there's some benchmarks out there where you can just say, hey, we may not have the best candidate experience, but at least we have parity. And companies like Glassdoor do a phenomenal job pushing data out there to help you stay in line.
So do you like, or do you feel like there's a world where there's transparency insofar as, the FedEx experience or the Domino's Pizza experience, et cetera, where you know where you are? My 8-year-old is fascinated by the Domino's. I don't even think he likes pizza, but he just likes the Domino's experience and coming in and looking at my desktop and going, Dad, they're preparing it right now. Now it's being boxed. Yeah. It's like, what? Okay, at one point they knock on the door. Like that's pretty much all I care about. But do you believe in that world? Do you think candidates want that or desire that, or do you think that we can deliver something like that?
All right, candidates absolutely want it. And while I typically am a very optimistic, positive person, I have to be cynical for a second. They're going to be waiting a really long time, Tincup. Yeah. It's just there is no systematized way to do it. today, even the most modern ATSs aren't candidate centric. So it's not built in. There's some new tools coming out. I don't know if they're going to live long enough to get adopted, but in the next 3 to 5 years, you will see candidate experience layers sitting on top of ATSs left and right. So that'll happen. My concern is, even with those tools coming down the pike, the companies have to go back to slide one, get your house in order, right? And I don't have a ton of faith that that's going to happen. And part of that's historical, Tincup. How many strong talent leaders do you know? You might know more than anyone on the planet, and that number might be 400, but even that number isn't enough to deliver on what we're talking about right now.
Right.
All right. So I think we have a ways to go there. I would put it on the companies to do more faster. I would ultimately put it on the job seekers to take responsibility for themselves as they go into the process and choose where they interview and where they spend their time based on these things. Because in my experience, the thoughtfulness and the effort that a company puts into these processes that we're talking about directly correlates to the internal.
That's right. They're showing you their best side. This is the romance.
That's right.
This is the romance phase of a relationship. And
that's right. That's right. Well, and besides that, you know, and the market has spoken. You know, it's the ideal number of interviews is 3 or 4. It's not 2 and it's not 5. It's 3 or 4, and it's in 2 or 3 business weeks, right? And so on and so forth. So if you're not at least meeting those, you know, it's easy to guess that your Glassdoor reviews are going to be really low. If you're at least consistently putting out, again, the average expectation, you can compete. You can compete for talent if you do good.
Right.
Because it's better than most. But yeah, I think we're far from that utopic state.
So your take on feedback for hiring managers and recruiters. What's the candidates? What's the expectation that the candidates should have in terms of feedback? What advice do you give hiring managers, and what advice do you follow also as a recruiter?
Yeah, and I love tying this to step 5, because I think you know, we talk a lot about the candidate-centric process and how important the candidate is, but in the end, we are working for a company serving the business, and we have to remember that. Talent is a complicated problem to solve, despite how simple people make it. That doesn't mean we have to ask everyone, right, to spend their brain power solving it for us. It's our job in some ways to make their job very easy. How do they fit into the talent system? And feedback is a huge part of that, Tincup. And I think we got to break it down a few ways. So one, most companies can't provide feedback because they don't have a structured interview process that generates meaningful feedback. It's as simple as that. It's like trying to do a science experiment that isn't well structured and then get meaningful results out of it. Can't do it. So I think first and foremost, when people are talking about feedback, that's where I would start the discussion is, have we put forward a thoughtful process to generate feedback? But even if you do that, there's a difference between opening the doors for feedback and facilitating movement. Someone gave me this piece of advice one time, so helpful, this visual of a big gymnasium. Imagine like a high school gymnasium, and you know, these gyms, they have many doors. They have like 4 doors you can open so that all the kids can go in at once. Well, some people just open those doors and they say, we're open to feedback and we'll give you feedback if we have it, and the doors are always open. But you actually have to go a step further. You have to actually facilitate the movement, right? As talent, you have to escort people into the gymnasium or escort them out of the gymnasium and explain why. So on the hiring manager side, if you've got the structured interviewing, I would break down feedback 2 ways, because you have to capture it before you can deliver it back to the job seeker. So one is on your interview scorecards or however you collect feedback, I would encourage you to keep those simple. You know, HirePool does some strategic consulting to bootstrap the consumer side, which you can hear about in a bit. And we do a lot of ATS review and interview architecture. And one of the most common things we see are scorecards that are so complicated, also not unified. And there's no way you can make meaningful feedback out of it. So that's one thing. The other piece is, again, just the interview not being structured. So on one hand, I would say structured interview with a clean feedback model or scorecard where you guide interviewers on how to enter feedback. You're going to get that feedback, obviously, more often than not. But even then, some people have asked, well, hey, Erin, how do you actually get feedback from them? Because they're very good at giving feedback. Simple way to put it. Let's make it easy for them. Hey, you just spent an hour with that person. We're not moving forward with them. What is one piece of feedback I could give them so that they could do better in their very next interview? And if you ask your whole team that, you're going to get some nuggets that you can go back and share with the candidate transparently that could improve their next interview, could change their life, improve the interview, get the job, and they're off and running. So it means a lot, and you got to do that. I think that's one end on the business side. The feedback on the candidate side, it's sort of a double-edged sword here because it tends to be a give to get, right? Well, Tincup, so you take the feedback you have from the company and you share it openly with the candidate, and lo and behold, in return, you get open feedback from the candidate. So there's a little bit of a chicken or egg problem here, but the feedback from the candidate is very helpful as you're constantly measuring your interview process. So, hey, how was your experience? What did they cover with you in the interview? Did they cover what I thought they were going to cover? And getting that feedback from both sides. And so using that 360 degrees keeps us really honest about the process, but it also makes gives people the ability to improve their interviewing skills or the hiring process at a company in a more manageable way than just going into a hiring team and saying, we need to get better at hiring.
Okay, just a quick time check, 18 minutes left. Those of you that would love to ask questions, we would love to entertain those questions. Got a couple things for you before we go to slide 6 or step 6. One's a bit esoteric, but it's something I'm very curious about. Can a firm in your mind have all A talent?
Yes, but you have to define A. So I don't define A as Stanford grads,
yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
You can always have A players, but they will have different amounts of experience, different amounts of exposure. But at least for me, I want nothing but A players, because A players are people who, get up in the morning and go, right? They're responsive. Right. They work hard on improving. So whether you're the best at your gig or not doesn't really make an A player for me, but I want A players on the team. So I think yes, you can, but maybe to your more, I say no to the question you might be asking me. Like Netflix maybe pulled it off, but if the next 1,000 companies try to do that, 99.99999 will fail.
Yeah,
it's a whole other webinar.
Same thing with Zappos, same thing with Amazon, same bit. All right, are you a believer in video interviews?
I think they're utility.
Okay.
We have a digital world, we have a distributed world. You use it. I do see they cause trouble more often than not if you're using them frivolously. Like, oh, we do this first round phone call, we should do a video call because the video is better. Well, not really. If your first round phone call is typically 20 minutes and you're always on the go and you're not really on Wi-Fi that often, it's a horrible idea. Because your technical difficulties will outweigh the enrichment of the video every time. So, for the most part, I appreciate video, but it does take some extra coordination. And I like to keep the first round interactions appropriate for what they are. I think a first phone call to the company should be a phone call, and it should be roughly 30 minutes. And then both parties should decide if they want to go spend maybe an hour together in person or video or phone, but make that collaborative process. So, I think really quick to wrap up the business side of it too. I was going to say it earlier, but I like to drive with chain reaction or give to get mentality for the business, but we keep it really simple. So, all right, Mr. Business Person or Mrs. Business Person, you have a job you want to hire for. If you fill out this user story when it gets done, then we'll set up a new position kickoff. But I won't set it up before you give that back to me so I can review it, because if I do that, then when we get in the meeting, it's not a productive meeting. And then they get the user story back to you, and then you get in the kickoff meeting. And in the kickoff meeting, you go through the interview plan and parameters and do all the things. And then you say, okay, I'm going to go do 1, 2, 3. And then when I do 1, 2, 3, I need you to do 1, 2, 3. And this is the whole cadence throughout the whole process. And if you pull it off, they really appreciate and value for making their job simple. I think I feel the need to express often how hard and complicated talent is, because I want our group to be valued and appreciated. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to explain every detail to them.
Right. Right.
Did you have another question buried in there?
I did. Because you have defined everything and through the lens of candidates, which I think and experience, which I like, and is different, genuinely different. What questions should candidates ask during the hiring process? Like, what should they come to the table with? If we've had an interview guide for the company and we've standardized that, and everyone's kind of playing by the same rules, and hopefully we can eradicate some of the really, really obvious biases. What should the playbook be for candidates?
Yeah, so let's get really specific here, because I can't, there's no way I could give an effective playbook in 30 seconds to the whole audience. But there's something that does apply to probably every single person on this phone call the next time they start interviewing. So when you think about the hiring process at companies, okay, at large, the first 2 rounds are highly structured. Anything beyond that, unstructured. And the reason is companies got really good at screening people out, right? So when it comes to a recruiter doing a first round phone call, or a hiring manager or a tech lead doing a second round phone call, people have gotten pretty robotic about that stuff. This works to your advantage as a job seeker, works to your advantage as a job seeker. And so where I would encourage people to focus on that question that you just asked, Tincup, is when you get into the first phone call. So you're going to typically have a first phone call with every job lead that you find. Remember, it's your search, not theirs. And I would ask 3 or 4 acute questions about the role that do 2 things for me. 1, validate it's real, it's open, it's approved. 2, that it's in my ballpark, right? That it's within reach. Even if it's a stretch, I want to know it's within reach. Because what companies are really bad at are telling you no, you're not a fit. Here's why you're not a fit. We've made that decision. It's clear, right? And so you'll spend weeks, many hours, weeks, refreshing emails, follow-ups, checking up, one more coffee, one more phone call, all the while, never a good use of your time. So in that first phone call, what I really encourage job seekers and anyone listening to focus on, a couple things. 1, who does this spot directly report to? If you can't get a clean answer to that question, there's an issue.
Right.
2, how big is the team? And then the follow-up question of, what is the composition of the team? This one's super important for me, Tincup, because if you're applying to join a team of 2, it is much different than a team of 22, right? If you're applying to a team of 5 and all 5 are senior, much different than if all 5 are junior, okay? So, excuse me, for me, if the recruiter can't tell me who the hiring manager is clearly, and I can't get a quick paint of the landscape and how I might fit into that, I'm going to pull back from that discussion until they have their house in order, because it's not a good look for them, not a good use of my time. And I'm going to move on to the next interview where they can answer those questions.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. Anyhow, I'll tell you offline a lot of what I love about that. I do have a question from Celeste that I want to put in front of you before you go to step 6. She asks, what would be a sample or a template for user story questions to get the info needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing, so just rattle off a couple for you, Celeste. I always ask hiring managers what systems, technologies, tools, doesn't have to be tech. If you're in sales, you might use Salesforce. If you're in recruiting, you might use an ATS. But what systems or tools do you expect them to use every day in their first 6 months on the job? And I asked that one really specifically because people like to list a bunch of systems, but there's only a few they really use every day. So I think that's one question I asked to get a little bit more contextual, right, around what they'll be doing. Another question we'll ask is, for the person who takes this role, in 12 to 18 months, what does their career trajectory look like? What are the options that they'll have in their career trajectory? So if you can imagine how this lands with hiring managers. I'm hiring someone right now, and you're asking me to tell you what their options will be for leaving me in 12 to 18 months, right? You know,
My
yeah.
next wife will be much taller.
Yeah. Well, and if you're a larger company, you know, you say, no, there's this thing called internal mobility. Yeah. But I really like that one. The other one is Celeste. Which cross-functional teams will this person rely on most, or be blocked by, or be dependent on? You know, it can be more constructive. I like to use dependencies there. But again, people don't operate in a box. If you're joining a company, you typically can't get that much shit done without somebody else helping in some way, shape, or form, whether that's IT or finance or HR, what have you. So, you know, asking those questions like, what systems are they going to use? What people are they going to work with? You know, what does success look like in their first 6 months? That one's probably more common, but rarely answered.
Right. And if they can't even give you a rough definition of what success looks like, it's not real.
It's not real. You'll find really quick Tincup on stage. You'll find that the point of these are stories too is self-checking these hiring managers. They'll pull back. If they can't fill out the form, they don't follow through. Right? If they can, they do it the next day. They're like, hey, I'm done. Here you go. And as a recruiter, I definitely want to work with someone who's motivated to do the work.
Yeah. All right, go to step 6. I've got a follow-up from Andrew that we'll get to, but finish up with step 6.
All right, so this one can actually be quick. Data. The quickest way for our industry to get respect is using data. The biggest blocker for our group to use data is that the processes and everything that would generate clean data that we can use is not done. It's not in place, and most people don't know how to do it. So we have to help them do it. We have to get in place so we can get the data. Once you have the data, let's use it a few ways, okay? Forget fancy data. Tincup, I go out to companies, they're like, we want to do analytics. I'm like, how many interviews did you reschedule last week? Right? Back to slide 2. So let's not talk about fancy metrics. Let's talk about a few baseline metrics you have to have in play. First of all, quality of source. Got to have it. Modern ATS might tell you, if not, you got to do it on a spreadsheet. But you have all of these supply side channels like job boards, sourcing tools, agencies, etc. They're all just sources, and they give you candidates, and those candidates have a certain level of propensity. So for example, Tincup, every time he introduces me to a candidate, those candidates on average make it to the final round. Versus maybe, you know, Indeed gives me a candidate, those candidates on average get rejected before the first round. So the quality of source from Tincup is much higher than Indeed. Therefore, I'm going to invest more time, money, resources in that supply side channel than I will in the Indeed, as an example. So quality of source, super important. Number 2, this is where I would live and breathe all day, is the turn rates, Tincup. So when I'm talking about turn rates, I'm talking about a couple key points here. How many hiring manager interactions to hires? So typically I would recommend your hiring manager take the second call in the process. So how many hiring manager calls to hire? So that's a huge data point. The way I use that data point goes back to trust. How many hiring managers ask you to review resumes? Half the audience raises their hand. How many of you never want to have a hiring manager review a resume ever again? The whole audience raises their hand. Great. Hiring manager, here's the deal. You're looking for a blue zebra. Is that right? Yep, great. The company average is 6 hiring manager screens to hire. So let's do this. I will set up 6 hiring manager screens. You can review the resume. Obviously, I will have spoken to that person and made sure it's good use of your time. But if you have any questions about the resume, ask me, let me know. But take the call. And then if we haven't hired someone by the time you get to 6, which is the company average, we'll sit down and we'll calibrate. Deal? You'll be shocked how often they say yes. You don't have to review resumes, and data helps you keep that clear. I would use that. I won't give you more examples necessarily, but that same one, there's all this tension in recruiting because it's shared responsibility, right? We are welcomed into everybody else's house to help them build their house, product, engineering, sales, marketing, which in turn gives them the right to be in our house. Only it's not exactly the same because we don't tell them how to build products or write marketing collateral. And so to avoid some of those tough conversations where you're kind of telling me how to do my job, but not really doing what I'm asking you to do, and you know what I'm talking about. Let's put some clear benchmarks in place, right? Here's my job. Here's your job. We agree that when we get to 6, we'll stop and talk. Cool, let's go get some work done. So I think hiring manager to hire is one. The second one is your on-site to hire ratio. On-site to hire ratios, I've seen upwards of 25, 30, makes me cringe. I would say market average is closer to 15. I don't want to say 20, but that might be accurate. I generally believe if you put a good strategy in place, you could be closer to 3 to 1. And I love that metric because it translates into time that your engineering team or your product team or your sales team is spending away from what their core function is to build a team. You know, burden them on the talent side and the hiring manager side. Hiring manager's job to build a team, but you want to protect your team. You want to make sure that when they're going out to interview someone, they feel like it's for a good reason. You want to protect against interview fatigue, and you sure as hell want to know that if you get the troops in order for an on-site and you want to hire that person, that you have a high shot of hiring them. So the third data point that I'm pretty militant about is offer acceptance rate. I don't track it like most of the market, Tincup. I think for some companies it's a vanity metric, right? Like, oh, we make all these offers, they always get accepted, people like us. Yeah. Or we make all these offers, nobody accepts it. Oh, the market's so tough. You know, our offer acceptance rate is 50%. My point of view is the offer acceptance rate is just an effectiveness metric, right? Like, hey, we decided to make an offer to Tincup. We were right. We should have made the offer. He wanted it. He accepted it. He started. You should be right 9 out of 10 times by the end of your process, and ask your CFO to sign off on an offer, or your CEO, and then talk to a human being about salary and their kids, or their, you know, their 20s and traveling, or their 401k. These life-changing events, you should be sure. You should have some confidence in that. So I really push companies to use that metric in such a way that you expect it to be over 90%. But certainly more as an effectiveness metric. And then last but not least, the candidate experience survey. If you're not pulsing your candidates either through a system like Greenhouse or using Typeform, you know, building a quick Typeform URL that you can send out in your email signatures when you wrap up with candidates, huge miss. Go collect some data. Ask simple questions. Were we on time? Were we prepared? Did we know that it was you walking in the room, right? Really basic things to just tell you, are we operating in a healthy way? Don't look for one data point that'll solve all your problems. You might be looking for a long time.
Right.
No more.
All right. We got 2 minutes, and Andrew's got 2 questions. So let's do these really quickly. Speaker said that candidates should have 3 to 4 interviews. Was that 3 to 4 people total? 3 to 4 rounds? Does that include
stages.
Phone screen stages?
Yeah, stages. So you're at like first round phone call, second round phone call, third round on site, which may include 4 or 5 people. So you might get up to 5, 6, 7, 8 people over those stages.
Got you. Okay, good. Thanks for Andrew for asking that. Second one that he asked and wants to know is if there's any good benchmarking sources that you kind of go to for you.
There aren't. There's some decent ones out there, but they tend to be a little selfish. So, you know, for example, if you use the Greenhouse applicant tracking system, they do have benchmarks built into their candidate experience survey, which they collect, which all of their customers use. So they have benchmarks. So some of the systems have their own benchmarks. Otherwise, you're going to be looking for these reports that come out. I always look at them with one eye closed, you know, because again, like, where is it all coming from? But Indeed puts a report out, Glassdoor puts a report out. Lightspeed Ventures just put out a report. I know Tincup and I both have that, and we can share that one. That one is more grassroots, but I'll tell you guys it's worth reading because basically Luke and Amy went directly to, you know, the 100 or so head of talent and asked, you know, the questions in the weeds and got all the answers. So those are real responses coming out of ATSs that we may or may not have been able to share, put in that report. So I would go read that report for sure.
So it is the end of the hour. It is the end of the webinar, and Erin has done a fantastic job. I want to thank Erin, A, for carving out some time and doing this, B, for being a good human being. Also want to thank our sponsor, Glassdoor, for allowing us to do this bit. Follow Erin on Twitter. He's always putting out really thoughtful content, as you can kind of see from hearing him speak and seeing his content. And that's it. This is a wrap. We're done. Everyone have a wonderful day, and Godspeed.